Good morning. My name's Alec Olszewski. I'm the Manager of Aquatic Industry Services here at Lifesaving Victoria, and I'd like to welcome you here to 200 The Boulevard, Port Melbourne, Lifesaving Victoria headquarters. Today we're here to talk about risk management, and the theme of the breakdown of that is that we're looking at processes, people, and pools. We're all involved in pools and aquatics. So that's how we're going to try and break it down for you today, which is to say that we're going to workshop risk management. We're going to go over a little bit of theory, and we're going to hear from people in the industry about how they're treating specific risk management in their spots. So today we're meeting on the lands of the Boonwurrung people of the Southeast Kulin Nation, and I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and any Aboriginal elders who may be here with us today. Here at Lifesaving Victoria, we also have an inclusion statement. So we begin this meeting mindful of positive, safe and supportive working environment, and we seek to build across Lifesaving and Lifesaving Victoria and encourage everyone to be part of an open and respectful exchange of ideas and value what is shared. So I'm actually kicking us off this morning. I'm going to do a bit of a theory of risk management and try and put it in the context of aquatic facilities that we all work in. Just by a show of hands in the room, who's really strong on risk management? No? Couple? Handful? Few. Who's sort of got a bit of an understanding but wants to learn a little bit more? Okay, there's a fair few there. Hence we're at a risk management workshop, right? Who's got no risk management background, has absolutely base knowledge? It's okay, put your hand up, but well, good. All right, so we're in that sort of middle space around risk management. And so what I wanted to do this morning is to unpack it a little bit, talk about a bit of the theory, but also give you some practical ways that you can start to think about that. To that end, I put a risk assessment on each of your table. We will go through this risk assessment, but what I wanted to do is break down the theory around risk management and also give you a bit of a guide on how you might be able to fill in something similar to this in your workplaces, but also noting that in your workplaces there's going to be a bit of different context. We're going to start with the GSPO. The GSPO is our Bible in aquatics for everything, and believe it or not, there's a whole risk management section on the guidelines for safe pool operations. I hope everybody was aware of that. If not, I'm going to run through some of the items that are in the GSPO, but point out that this is being developed directly from the ISO 31000. So the way that the GSPO steps us out is actually the way that risk management is managed in the international standard. If you jumped on the GSPO, you're looking for that button in the middle that says risk management. And from there, it'll take you into two sections. It's got RM1 through RM8, risk management 1 through risk management 8, and then risk management 9 through 13. Risk management 1 through risk management 8 talks about aquatic risk and a framework for aquatic risk management, and tells us how we can or should manage risk in an aquatic environment and the type of things that we consider. But it's not actually the practical way to implement risk management at your facility. The 9 through 13 section is about implementing risk management frameworks generally. So that's the portion of the GSPO that I'm going to try and cover off this morning. It's actually practically how do you deliver a risk management framework. I'm going to put a aquatic context on it as I go through, but the aquatic risk management framework within the GSPO tells us as facility operators what type of things we do need to consider in our framework as we build the framework. Right? I'm taking it a little bit more simply. We're going to look at risk generally and workshop how we risk assess, how we manage some of the risks within our facilities. So if you bear with me. We will be covering off establishing the context within aquatic facilities, risk identification, risk analysis, risk evaluation, and risk treatment. And for those of you that may be familiar with the international standard, it's often shown like this. So it's a bit of a process. You start at the top with establishing context, identify, analyze, and evaluate risks in the middle, and we're treating risk. Off to the right-hand side there, we're monitoring and reviewing our risks. And at every stage in the process, we need to be consulting with our teams. I'm going to dive into establish the context first. And I'm going to throw a question out to the room. What does establish the context mean?
It's sort of like what the environment is. So say in the aquatic environment, you're in that, and that presents like certain types of risks.
Yeah, definitely. It is that. Is there anything else? I'll come back and I'll cover your point off. So in establishing the context, as you said, in our environment, we might be putting it in an aquatic facility context. In risk management more generally, we need to establish the context in which we're actually assessing risk. So if we were to assess the risk in this room, we might scope up that we're only looking at risk within this room, and that is context within which we're assessing risk. We might also look at this room and say, what history of incidents are in this room, right? That's establishing context. And we might also look at it in the context of we're in a workshop today. So what type of risks might be present here? And that essentially is establishing context here. Within that established context, there are generally within the theory two types of context. There's internal context and external context. An internal context for us might be previous risk assessments on similar events, internal research and data, so incident history that may have occurred in a similar environment, physical dimensions, so what is the shape of the room, what physical hazards are here, what is the room actually look like, and maybe even like behavioural dimensions within an internal context. That might be the type of behaviour that we're used to experiencing when we bring a group of people like this together. So if I was, and I will expand on that in an aquatics context in a minute, but we can also, in an external context, look at those same four dimensions. So risk assessments that have been assessed by other organisations in similar environments, maybe data or incident history in similar environments elsewhere. Similar environments to ours, but not our own environment, and learnings from those. And perhaps behavioural dimensions, we might be looking at something a little bit more like the local demographic of the people that might actually come to this area. So internal and external context. So if we're considering establishing the context in an aquatic environment, what type of things do we need to consider?
Yeah, like you said, the groups of people that are going to come to us.
So the groups of people that are coming to our facilities, and that's an internal context, but it can also be an external context that we're looking at. So the demographics of people that live in the area near our facility and what they might look like, or behaviours that have occurred in the facility in the past. Anybody else?
Design of the facility.
The design of the facility, the shape, the how close the environments are to each other, depth of water, shallowness of water, that type of thing. Thanks, Bobby. Anybody else? Say that again. So previous incidents that may have occurred in our facility and learnings from those. So again, establishing context. Things like the drowning report. So from an external context, this graph at the bottom here is actually provided by Royal. I put the one on there that talks about drowning in rivers and creek locations. But if we were to be risk assessing a river or creek, we might go and have a look at data that's out there about how often in a river or creek location someone may have drowned in recent history. And the other part of that graph that's provided by Royal is what activity were the people doing immediately prior to drowning in that type of environment. So that can that can help inform our context. I did change the heading on this slide, which in establishing context when we're doing risk, we actually need to first step one step back and inform ourselves. So from an external context, we can also look at things like this, which is the drowning prevention change by the International Lifesaving Federation. And this heads or has three main leading factors that can affect drowning, which are lack of knowledge, disregard, or misunderstanding of the hazard which is present. So in that case, or in our case, water. Unconfirmed or unrestricted access to the hazard, so lack of barriers that stop people being able to access a waterway or a particular danger. The inability to cope once in difficulty, so that is unable to self-rescue, unable to perform a rescue if you are somebody supervising, or and the final one in that chain is the lack of supervision. So lack of supervision in and around aquatic spaces. So that's a context by which we might risk assess part of our environment. We also at LSV have data like this, where we can pull up a geographical region and we can say in the last 10 years, there were 29 drowning deaths in this region. 21 of those were Geelong residents, 68 hospitalisations, emergency department presentations for non-fatal drowning, and likelihood of drowning deaths occurring in any given year. So we have a 94% chance in the Geelong region of having a drowning death in that region. And that's all relevant context to yourselves if you're thinking about risk assessing in your facilities as well. Location and activity from the Victorian drowning report there. Where does it occur? Beaches and rocky outcrops, harbour and bay, rivers and creeks. So swimming pools in the Geelong region. We've got a couple of people talking from Geelong today, which is why I threw up their stats. It's not as likely to occur in your environments, but you do have environments around you which will affect the behaviour. And we've got a sort of population range at the bottom there as well. So the proportion of deaths compared to the proportion of population gives you a bit of an insight there that 45 to 64-year-olds have a little bit of a higher likelihood based on their population, etc. All right, so this is all establishing context, but what does that mean in the sense of the risk assessments that I put in front of you? Establishing context is a way for us to scope. It's a way for us to say, we are going to look at risk within a specific environment or a specific way or for a specific population, but we're also going to exclude certain risk factors. We might not be looking at the financial risks. We might not be looking at the behavioural risks. So it is a way for us to say, we are going to assess risk, but we're going to assess it within the scope. And really, establishing context is that front page of your risk assessment, right? So if we were risk assessing, the type of thing that we're going to establish our context with is who's the risk owner? What does risk owner mean? It's the person in charge or the person that holds a responsibility for ensuring that risk is met. There's some other things in here that you may or may not see. Has the risk already been looked at once before? If it has, then we can go and have a look at other risk assessments that have had a look at it. If not, well then we might need to establish a whole lot of more information before we dive into this. There's and this template is one of the templates that we use internally here at Lifesaving Victoria, but you will notice there's departments across there. So which people are affected by the risk that we're about to analyse, and that's all about establishing context as well. Describing the risk that we're actually going to assess is contextual. Who is at risk is contextual. Who conducted the risk assessment and what subject matter expertise did we go and consult with, or who did we consult with to get information and inform ourselves? Are there legislations, codes of practice, standards, etc. like this? This is all establishing context. The other context which is important, which is over on your back page, is that your organisation may have already developed a risk management framework. So your risk management framework is how your organisation perceives risk and how significant or how or what their appetite is, right? So risk matrix, these are very common across risk assessments, but it's not good enough for you to pick up my risk assessment that I've given you today, take it back to your organisation and say something is an extreme risk, because your organisation might perceive it in a different way, right? They might have developed a slightly different framework, and it's important when you're looking at risk assessments that you're actually able to compare like with like, similar with similar, and actually come out with the same risk profile, right? On this page as well, we've got an example of a risk appetite here at the bottom, which is headed prioritising risk. And that ranges from low through to extreme. And there's some guidance there for this particular organisation that says what's acceptable and what's not. So high in within this context, a high risk is a risk where the activity would be discontinued as soon as reasonably practicable, and that we need to identify measures to improve that risk within 3 months or demonstrate a reduction in risk if it cannot be achieved, those type of things. So this is all context to your risk assessment as well. From there, we then, in a risk assessment perspective, we're jumping into that middle phase. And there's 3 steps in this middle phase of risk assessing. They are identifying risks, analysing risks, and evaluating risks. So, in an aquatic environment, if you're looking at a swimming pool, for example, what type of hazards might we identify? Anybody? Drowning, is it a hazard? Or is it an outcome? So we look at your risk assessment in front of you there, Jamie. Column 3 there would say what might happen, how can it happen? However, what would be the hazard that might lead to someone drowning? Water? What type of water? Anybody? Deep water? Yeah? What type? Wet water? Wet water is definitely a hazard, but if we were to categorise it, we might have deep water within our facility, we might have shallow water in our facility, and those 2 hazards might have different outcomes. So shallow water might lead us to have spinal injury and that type of thing, whereas deep water is more likely to have us have drowning incidents. But we all know people can drown in shallow water as well. Yeah, drown in a puddle? Exactly right. What other hazards might we have within our facilities? Yeah, slippery surface, lack of rail. So again, the outcome of these might still be drowning though, right? So if you have a slippery surface, someone's running on it, slips over, hits their head and enters into even a shallow body of water, that might be a hazard that can lead to a drowning incident or at least a serious injury. Yeah. Lack of barriers, as you said. So if you have a change room that exits onto a deep water area, there is potentially a risk there that young children that get away from their parents as they're exiting the change room might get very quickly into deep water. So the lack of barrier might come into context there. So water features that we might have, yeah. Chemicals, there's a whole raft of risks that come out of chemicals and chemical management, chemical storage. Line of sight issues, so you might have obstructions that prevent lifeguards and supervisors from actually adequately supervising spaces. Fall from height risk, yeah, so fall from height risk, so any work that's being conducted off the ground, there's a potential that someone might fall, yeah. Lack of signage, poor deployment plans, all of the above, these could all be perceived as identified hazards, which are in column 1. And that's the first step of identifying it. Now, within the scope or the context of your risk assessment, you may have already narrowed the scope of this risk assessment to a specific activity. So we might not be looking at the signage within an aquatic environment, we might only be looking at the activities that are happening within a program or space, and we might only be looking at one body of water, or rather than the whole facility, those type of things, which is why it's important to establish our context first and analyze it within that context. It might be that you come back and analyze the same space multiple times in different contexts. And that's the reality of risk management processes. Once you start, you just keep going until you feel like you've covered everything off. And there can be multiple layers of risk assessment as well. So identifying the risk, analysing the risk of the next two columns that are here within your risk assessment. So it's what can happen, how can it happen, and the next step beyond that is what controls have we got in place to mitigate those things that might happen, right? So if we were just thinking about deep water as our hazard, what can potentially happen? Someone gets out of the depth, and I missed what you said. A drowning is the potential outcome. Yeah, absolutely. How can it happen? Weak swimmers, non-swimmers, how else can it happen? A medical situation, how else can it happen? Injury, so someone's swimming laps and pulls a muscle and then can no longer rescue themselves. A collision between two patrons, or hit the wall, hit the edge of the wall as they slipped on the way in because the surface was slippery next to the deep water. Violence, occupational violence, so there's a fight that leads to drowning in deep water. Yeah, we're stretching it, but yeah, absolutely, yeah. And look, I've seen the fights next to the deep water leading to somebody getting in there over the back. Heat exhaustion could lead to drowning in deep water, right? So there's a whole raft of ways that it can happen. The next step that we need to do beyond that is on each of those that we identify, how are we controlling it, or what controls are in place already? What mitigating factors are there now? Yeah. What type of mitigating factors do we have around deep water to protect people from drowning in our facility? Signage. So the signage warns people that the water exists, but it doesn't jump off the wall and rescue them, but it's there, yeah. So lifeguards, trained rescuers, people that are able to rescue us in the circumstance. You had your hand up. Rescue equipment, so we've got tools that help us rescue when we need to do it, makes our job easier and less dangerous over the back. Signage, yeah. So signage about the deep water hazard, warning people that it's there, slippery floor signage to say, this area is slippery, please don't slip here because we don't want you to smack your head and land in the pool. No running signage is the other one that we see a fair bit of. Educational program, so we actually teach kids to swim as a control, and in turn we also teach them about the hazards of deep water and why they need to be supervised when they're over there. Yep. Physical barriers, so if we didn't want somebody to access a deep area of our facility, we might put a barrier in place that stops kids coming from one end of the facility and ending up in another end of the facility, or we might just be isolating the deep water for other reasons, like when they're close to change rooms or things like that. Parental supervision and encouraging parental supervision, so programs like Watch Around Water and Swim Safe and the like, things like that. So they're the types of controls that we might already have in place. The final point in that process is called evaluating the risk. In our table here, we're calling that residual risk levels. Has anyone ever heard of residual risk before? Yeah, over the back. Yeah, it's Chloe, isn't it? Sorry, Emily, forgotten. Emily, you heard of inherent risk? All right. So residual and inherent risk are two different times when we actually assess risk. So some risk assessment tables, they'll actually put that risk evaluation before the controls, right? So in that circumstance, we're actually looking at the risk before any controls are applied, and we're just determining how likely the thing is to occur, the incident or the hazard leading to an outcome is to occur before we list any of our controls. And sometimes we can already see, if we do that, that we're able to already dramatically reduced the risk of things happening. If you consider a facility that has lifeguards versus one that doesn't, inherent risk evaluation, which happens before the controls, where we say, hey, if we just evaluate this without considering any of our controls, someone's more likely to drown potentially in a facility that doesn't have lifeguards, right? We then list the control lifeguard, and then we residual risk level, we assess it again after the controls are applied. And that, in that circumstance, leads us to conclude that actually we have been able to reduce some of the risk here. So in this example, we've only put residual risk there. Most of the time, the simplest risk assessment forms that you will see will just be looking at that residual risk, which is the after controls are applied section. Right, there's a couple of headings under each of those. One is consequence, next one's likelihood, and the third one is risk priority. Are people familiar with how this works? So consequence, likelihood, and risk priority comes from our context. So we established the context right up front, and we said for our particular facility, we're going to use the following risk matrix, which is the one on the back page of your documents there. Down one side there, we've got consequence listed, and across the top, we've got likelihood listed, right? So for consequence, it's important that we actually consider the most extreme thing that could happen and where that sits within our risk matrix, right? So if we were saying the potential consequence of deep water is that somebody could drown and die, where would you rate that on that left-hand side of that table? Catastrophic? Yeah? Does anyone think that that actually just could be major? Yeah? You can't get worse than death, but you can have multiple deaths. So one of the gaps that's in the context of this form is that they're not defined here, right? So when we come to our risk matrix, what we actually do want to see in a risk matrix is a definition of what catastrophic means to the organisation that we're in. Without that, we can't really assess the risk all that well. And if this document was different to another risk assessment, but they both said catastrophic on them, but they had different definitions of catastrophic, we might find that we have different outcomes. All right, so it's important to define that within our context right up front. But in this circumstance, we've got drowning. The consequence is potentially death. And for the sake of it, I'm going to say that that is catastrophic for us here today. All right, so we're saying catastrophic outcome could be death. What's the likelihood that it's going to occur? It's facility dependent. It's context dependent, right? So we started with our context within our facility. We had a look at history of incidents. We had a look at history of incidents in our region. We had a look at the demographics of people in our region. We examined the behaviours of people that are coming to our facility. And we also put it in the context of our facility, in our particular facility, and I worked in a facility not too long ago where the toddlers pool was near to deeper water, right? And the toddlers pool being so close to deeper water elevated the risk or the likelihood that some poor child came out of that toddlers pool and within 2 to 3 meters were in deep water out of their depth. So in the context of my facility that I was working in, that was potentially more likely. Yeah? And we were able to take data on that and say, once a month, once a quarter, there's a child that comes from here and gets to there and we've got a registered incident against it. Right? So we're looking at our incident data in that context as well. All right? So in that circumstance, what we do for that particular facility, we start with catastrophic. We come across that line and we say, once in 5 years, wow, it's possible for us in that facility that I was working in. Well, actually, no. Once within 12 months is the definition of likely at the top of this risk matrix. Maybe we're saying it's catastrophic times likely because we are pulling that kid out on a particular time. However, I'm only considering that without the controls in place, right? So now what I need to do in my evaluation is have a look at all of the controls that I've put in place and try and determine whether we can reduce that likelihood, or whether the likelihood has been reduced by the controls that we have put in place. Does that make sense? In turn, what those two factors across the top spit out for us in your risk assessment is what goes into that final column in that section, which is our risk priority. And our risk priority will help us determine what we need to work on in terms of the list of highest risks down to lowest risks within the particular thing that we're looking at. Finally, if we flipped over to the next page, we've got table B. Table B occurs after we have after we've had a look at our risk assessment, and this is a bit of a plan for what we're going to do in the future. So what else can we do? Gone over the risk assessment in the context of the risk matrix and the risk likelihood. But if we were to then list into table B our risks in order of how they came out on the table, we can get an idea of what are our most priority risks, or our highest priority risks, and what we can start to do to work on reducing those. And in this part of the table is where you put your proposed controls. A lot of risk assessments I see when I go around facilities have the current controls and the proposed controls within the risk assessment, and then they do a risk analysis in quick succession, but they include all of the controls that they say they're going to do but aren't in place yet. And so that doesn't necessarily give you a good outlook on what your risk is. So here we add in proposed controls, and we put a date on those, and we say we're going to implement this control within that specific time frame, and it's this person's responsibility. And when that time frame rolls around, it's our responsibility to come back to the risk assessment, reassess the risk, and determine whether we have actually been able to alleviate or reduce the risk in that area. Right? So that is that final step there, which is we're already there, risk treatment. Right? So we go and treat the risks. Beyond that, there might still be something that gets through our list of controls. If you haven't seen this before, this is called the Swiss cheese model. We have hazards at one end of that scale, all the way through to losses. And all of the pieces of Swiss cheese are intended to show the controls that we're putting in place. Right? Our goal in risk assessing, every time something gets from a hazard and gets part of the way through our process, we might call it a near miss. Right? So something happened and it got through a couple of controls. The outcome wasn't that somebody drowned, but we were only 2 or 3 steps away from it. That is a near miss. If we get all the way through, unfortunately, our controls have failed. We're in a situation where we do need to reassess the whole process and try and plug the holes. Sometimes we're not going to have been able to have foreseen those holes, but once that's happened, that now becomes new context for us, right? So in the process of listing our proposed controls following an incident, we're just looking to plug the things that we now know. Make sense? And that section is the monitor and review. And you'll see that monitor and review is cyclical. It comes back to establishing context. So once we're able to monitor new incidents, monitor what's happening in our facilities, that will help us redefine our context next time we come to the top of this tree. Okay? I will wrap up again shortly. I'll just say that GSPOs in the front section, the 1 to 8 section, talks about risk framework and how to implement those. I'll just say that risk frameworks start with a mandate. They start with a policy and a commitment by an organisation. The framework then needs to be designed, implemented, monitored, and continually improved. So that process is a high-level risk assessment process that manages all of your risk in one context. And you might see sometimes your risk assessments turned into a risk register, and that's just a level of risk of each risk assessment put into a framework and monitored. Risk management best practice starts with planning, communication and consultation, which I didn't go into very much in my presentation, but at every level we should be communicating and consulting with our teams. Implementation of the process. Evaluation is monitoring and reviewing or testing, things like doing audits, external audits, pressure testing your facility for incidents, running scenarios, that type of thing. Monitoring and reviewing incident data that we've got coming into our facility, putting in place improvement plans, and then coming back to the top and planning, so a cyclical process. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce Jamie Washburn. Jamie Washburn's the operations manager, coordinator at Moonee Valley. He looks after a number of facilities. What the rest of our speakers are going to do today is actually talk about the context of their facility, some of the controls that they've got in place to manage risks there. So let me again introduce Jamie Washburn. Thank you very much.
Hello everyone, good morning. My name is Jamie Washburn. I'm the operations manager at Kilo East Leisure Centre, and I also overlook Queen's Park Outdoor Pool, which is a seasonal pool. What I'm going to go through today is a bit of the process and a walkthrough essentially of opening our seasonal pool, Queen's Park, and the steps that we had in place from a risk approach and just general approach to opening up our facility, which you probably already know, but it's just our steps through that. And then I'm also going to go through chemical management at Kilo East Leisure Centre and what we do there. So Moonee Valley is run by Belgravia Leisure. There's 3 facilities at Moonee Valley. There's the Kilo East Leisure Centre, which you can see down the bottom here, Ascot Leisure Centre, the top right, and then Queen's Park Outdoor Pool, which is the bottom right there, which is a seasonal pool, which we're going to talk on a little bit today. So the timeline of events to opening up Queen's Park. So we finished up our season in April this year, and we essentially just had a pack down as you normally would, and we kept our pool plant running over the winter period, which is a great idea in the scheme of things, because it definitely helped in the lead up to coming to open up our facility. Less manual handling, less having to move stuff around and vacuuming and cleaning. It definitely helped out quite a lot. And then through August, September, we started our recruitment campaign. And then in October, the month before opening, we had a look at our document review for our facility. So in this point here, this is a good opportunity for us to review our plans, deployment plans, our facility operations manuals. And then we had a lot of, this is when we kind of focused on our risk management approach from a sense of in-house WHS audits. Belgravia has a WHS audit which needs to be completed once every 6 months. But we did this twice before opening up our facilities. We had one that we did in October. We found out actions that we needed to do. There was plenty of gaps within our processes that we needed to kind of fill those gaps. And in that, we did another assessment probably a week before opening, so we could then ensure that once we did open our doors to public, we were able to say that we had all these processes in place come open. We also had a look at our risk assessments that we had for our facility, reviewed our risk register. You will have a lot of different risks, obviously, at an outdoor pool and an indoor pool. So we just made sure that we did have things in place. And as I'll go through the slides shortly, you'll find that there'll be things that we wouldn't be able to foresee as we were going through the cleaning and opening process. So the week of October 17th. So one thing we found is our learners pool and toddlers pool was quite, the paint job wasn't great. It was a bit patchy, as you can see. There was paint falling off the side of the walls, and there was and the flooring. So this is an identified risk for us because one, there was literal paint chippings falling off onto people, and you could see it as they were getting out of the pool, and visibility in the pool water quality too. So that was a risk that we kind of saw at the start. And the control measures were that we're going to paint the pool. This took a lot of negotiation, you could say, but we eventually got there, and we'll go down a couple more slides down the line. We'll show you what it actually looks like, but a bit patchy, doesn't look too great. So our control measure was to get the pool painted. So November 1st was our cleaning day, starting day, and our venue manager's first day on site. So we only had 19 days from cleaning to opening, but there was preparation beforehand that we were able to get done there beforehand. On the November 7th, we started to utilise our junior managers for cleaning, cutting grass, clippings, getting leaves out of the pool, because at Queen's Park, as you can see, there's a lot of trees, and a lot of ducks. So in the week of November 7th, we identified another risk. So one of the risks was manual handling and manual handling of the strainer basket specifically. So we do have a risk assessment for manual handling, but because we were doing strainer baskets on a daily, probably twice a day at Queen's Park, there was a need for a specific risk assessment for the strainer baskets because obviously manual lifting and whatnot. So some control measures that we had in place there was to create a risk assessment specifically for strainer baskets. There was also to create a procedure for staff to use on how to clean a strainer basket. And then another mitigation was the use of a pulley system that we have there to get the strainer basket out of the actual pump itself, housing. So we identified the risk, we completed a risk assessment, created a procedure from that risk assessment, implemented controls and taught the team and inducted them how to use that, and then we'll review that post-season, so in 6 months' time. Some other things that you might just come across that might be a little bit smaller, I guess, but it's still a risk that you kind of need to mitigate is we found cracked tiles and missing tiles on our pool deck. So obviously these have sharp edges, create cuts, so a way we can get rid of that is to obviously replace those pool tiles. Week of November 7th, we started our social media campaign and the painting of the learners pool began. So 10 a.m. on November 7th, which was the day that they started painting, they said it couldn't rain. Well, council made it very clear to me, and I got a directive from council that it's not allowed to rain. I don't know what I was meant to really do there, but they told me it can't rain until at least 2 p.m. Later that day, at around 12:21, I sent a text message to council and sent them a notification that I got a rain notification saying it's going to rain in 15 minutes. And then as you can see, the council's response was, please, 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 no. 20 minutes later, it rains. So not much we can do to mitigate that kind of thing, but that is just a bit of a fun story. That week of November 7th, this is also a pretty key part of risk mitigation is the induction process and making sure your team know what they're doing at the facility and ensure that you log and have sign-offs and sign-off sheets for these inductions. So as you can see there, we did our lifeguard induction. We had multiple days. We pretty much spent the whole week doing inductions for lifeguards, junior managers, guest experience officers, CSOs, and the kiosk, and made sure that each person that was coming to these induction sessions were ticking off that they were competent and confident in doing different tasks around the facility. So whether that be putting the pool mats on, putting the pool vacuum out there, doing strainer baskets, doing backwashes. That is a control measure for yourselves and a control for your facility to ensure that people are safe and they're doing the right thing in the correct process. So that was a really key time is that week is obviously training our team, making sure that they were confident and we were confident that when it was them doing it solo, that we'd be pretty happy and happy that they were when they were happy that they could do the job correctly. So really important as a business and an organization that we having them sign off these sheets and we were signing off saying that we saw them doing this too. November 14th was Monday, November 14th, opening in 6 days on a Saturday. So everyone, all hands on deck. That morning, get a text message from the venue manager. Hey Jamie, bad news, I've just tested positive for COVID-19. All right, so I overlook Queen's Park Outpool. The venue manager does report through to me at Queen's Park Outpool. I did ask for his permission to post this, by the way. I didn't just post it. I was like, just making sure you're comfortable with this. And he said, yeah, no worries. Go nuts. So that is also a risk that you might find. And obviously, the big C word is something we've been dealing with the last 2 to 3 years. You have COVID safety plans. It's changed a little bit in the last 6 to 12 months, just from how you mitigate those risks. But we just saw the best possible way for him and for us was him to stay home until he was better. And he did some work from home, which is also quite good. He was able to overlook our policies. He was able to get the documents that we had from an induction process, and he was able to log those as we needed. In that week as well, we also had a review of our PPE around the facility. As you can see, wasn't that great, honestly. So the risk here was that the PPE wasn't in a suitable condition or suitable for the chemicals that we're using at our facility. Obviously, using acids and chlorines is quite detrimental to health, and PPE was the last barrier of defense from a risk perspective to be able to protect your team. And we found that what we had on site probably wasn't the best for what we were dealing with at the facility. So we saw that the PPE was outdated, and so we did a review of our PPE. We did an audit and ensured that we got some new PPE that was suitable for the chemicals that we were using on site, and removed the PPE that wasn't suitable. November 15th, the roster was finalised. We were able to do our final IT checks and checking our point of sales were done. Our cleaning was complete. On November 17th, we completed our second WHS audit, which is in-house audit, to make sure that what we did in terms of actions were complete prior. And we opened our doors on November 19th to members and guests on the Saturday. So some learnings from that. Obviously, document all your processes in place and have them in place for your facility, and a troubleshooting plan. This is really key for us coming into our season. I took over a facility from previous managers, but probably was going into it a little bit blind for myself. So so just making sure we document our processes in place, and some other areas or key things that I figured out that a key register is actually really important, so you know what keys do around a facility. Keep your pool tuning over summer. Over winter. It's actually quite good in terms of a manual handling perspective and a risk mitigation. You're not actually doing too much work at the end of the season. It actually helps quite a lot. You won't know all your risks until sometimes, like, you can try to mitigate all your risks at the start of the season, October, a month before you're open. But at the end of the day, there's going to be things that pop up as you're going, really. So you can do what you want to try and mitigate them, but there's going to be things that pop up in that week. So just making sure, don't let it stress you out too much. Try to just work with it. Try to help your team and just try to work with it as it comes. So things out of your control will happen. That's essentially, at the end of the day, that's what will happen. And document your induction process. Document your the training of your team. Make sure that everyone's signed off, because come any incidences or audits and whatnot, you're keeping yourself safe there. Now I'm going to talk a bit about chemical management at Killaloe Solar Centre. There's famously a very similar picture of Alec at Aquapulse, looking very similar to this, and it's still up at Aquapulse on the PPE cabinet. But this is our venue manager at Queen's Park. So what we're going to talk about is a little bit about PPE, chemical management, and what you can do to essentially make sure that your facility is compliant and for chemical management. So storage of PPE. There's some considerations of storing your PPE and checks that can be done. Making sure that your PPE is stored and cleaned and maintained, and stored away from dust. Check your PPE probably on a weekly basis. Checking for wear and tear, and we'll get into that a little bit later. So this is an example of a respirator that is good. So this respirator here, the size fits the person. So at Keilor Research Leisure Centre, we have PPE that's personalised PPE. So every person, every DM has their own set of PPE. They got their own respirator, they got their own jumpsuit, they got their own boots and gloves. Okay, so the PPE will fit the person that's using it. The respirator needs to be able to fit the face of the person that's using it. If it's too small, there's no use of having it. If it's too large, there's no use of having it. All right. The filters on the respirator also need to be fit for purpose for the chemicals that you're using. And you can see that it has the multiple colored bands on it, and each band represents a different filter and vapor that actually protects the person coming dosing chemicals. So give your staff the best possible protection when it comes to PPE. As we kind of saw at our previous facility, it won't give you much protection, and it probably only help you when you're mowing the lawn, honestly, and then the ugly. So this will probably do more damage wearing it than it will actually dosing chemicals. As you can see here, it's probably stored incorrectly. It's got mold on it. Don't use that. All right. So storage of your PPE. Ensure your PPE is stored in an airtight container. Don't leave it out in the weather. Don't leave it on chemical bags because it's pretty much redundant. Check for wear and tear, for holes and expiry date. So on these filters, they have an expiry date that you can have a look at them. But after 6 months of use, essentially just treat them as they're expired. With our personalized PPEs, you can see in the top right corner, each person has their own tub. It's got it's airtight. Make sure that they maintain that PPE themselves. Safety data sheets. So safety data sheets are really important. Not everyone realizes, but you'll have all the facilities will probably have a safety data sheet for chemicals that you have around your site. So your chlorine, your bisulfate, hydrochloric acid, those kind of things. However, safety data sheets need to be there for all chemicals in your facility, whether that be cleaning chemicals, gases, CO2 gas, oxygen gases, chemical. So those kind of things need an SDS sheet. But the SDS sheets are there for yourselves and for your staff and for firefighters to know exactly how they're going to deal with the chemicals that you're using on site. So an SDS sheet you can find in an SDS folder. You create a folder. You'll have all the information essentially of how to deal with that chemical, whether it be ecological, firefighting measures, if you manage to first aid measures, if you manage to get it on your skin, if you inhale it, that kind of thing. So you'll have all the information there about how to deal with that chemical and how to treat it if you were to manage to spill it or ingest it, that kind of stuff. Keilor Leisure Centre has 4 locations for our SDS sheets. We have one located at the front desk. We have one located at the plant room where the chemicals are. We have one at the first aid room. So if someone does get taken to the first aid room after ingesting chemicals of some sort, they can be treated at the first aid room and know what to do. We have one at the fire indicator panel as well. So when the firefighters do come to the facility, they open up the panel. There's an SDS sheet with all the chemicals in the facility because they all want to know exactly how they're going to be treating or how they're going to be the fire measures for that. Keep your chemical registers in your SDS sheet. So your chemical register will have each chemical that you have on site, the location of that chemical, the max quantity you have stored on site, SDS expiry dates. So come LSV audits and full platinum audits and whatnot, you're making sure that they're all up to date and you can update them prior to that. And they have the classification on them, whether it's a dangerous good or a hazardous good. So make sure you update this chemical register every time you get a new chemical, or if you change your storage. When we're at Keilor Leisure Centre, originally we only thought that we'd need 10 bags of acid bisulfate, but it turned out that we would use pretty much 2 bags a day. So the amount of bisulfate that we'd need to have on site changed from 10 bags to about 48. So that needs to be updated on our SDS, not SDS, our chemical register and our chemical labeling. SDS sheets, they go out of date every 5 years, so make sure you're up to date with those ones. So as of the date of issue, they last for 5 years. So check your chemical suppliers' websites. They do have the most up to date there. They generally update them once a year. but they will be up on their websites, or you can call their customer service team and sort that out. Labeling and packaging. Generally for dry chemicals, for pools, it'll be a white bag in 25 kilos. It'll be granular, and they're very generally very similar in that sense. For liquid chlorines, they're in polys or drums, up to about 15 kilos. So chemical labeling is generally pretty different as it comes as well. So just making sure that you're aware that different household cleaning items such as Morning Fresh and fuel that you have in your car, you have oxygen and CO2 and hand sanitizer, are all considered chemicals that you have on site. So if you have bulk amount of these on facility, you should be having an SDS for it, should be in your chemical register, and you should be making sure that facility are trained, and it's also stored in a correct way so they don't mix. So this is an example of a well-labeled chemical and a not well-labeled chemical. So if it is like the one on the left-hand side, you're probably better off to dispose of it safely. You want to make sure that you know and your staff know exactly what's in the bottles. So ensuring that it's labelled correctly. So store your chemicals off the ground, keep in well-ventilated areas. Containers need to be sealed and kept in a cool place and locked away from public and untrained staff. So this is an example of a pool chemical label that we have. So this is a pool chemical label that we've got from the LSV website. If you scan that QR code, it will literally download that one that's on the wall there. It is from the download is on the LSV website. In your pool chemical label, it will essentially, each chemical that you have on site, where you store it, it needs to have the name of the chemical, the UN code, HAZCAM code, the class primary, the supplier name, supplier telephone number, and the emergency contact and number, as well as PP required. So if you scan that QR code, it will take you exactly to that chemical label, and it'll help you out there. So chemical storage continued. Keep chemicals away from each other. Keep your chemicals off the ground. Store open chemicals in an airtight container. So if you're opening up a bag of bicarb and you're only using 5 kilos out of the 25, you're putting that rest of the 20 kilos in an airtight container located at your chemical storage. Obviously keeping chemicals off the ground, because if you do manage to spill another chemical, that they don't mix and react. Have pool chemical labels where the chemicals are stored. So you can see here on the wall, the chemical labels are there. And we also keep SDSs as well as procedures and how to dose those chemicals on the wall as well, located in quick, so that people can, or the DMs can see it and grab it if need be. Have your SDSs close by. Chemical storage. This is the dangerous good compatibility chart. So if you're not too sure about what chemicals can mix, this compatibility chart tells you what it where they store them. So essentially goes through the class types of the different chemicals that you might have on site, whether you need to separate it, segregate it, isolate it, refer to SDSs, or if they're okay to be stored next to each other. Don't be scared to, or don't be scared to isolate your different chemicals around your facility. That works best as long as it's they're kept away from untrained staff. Don't just put them all in one shed and just hope for the best. At Culoris, I just know our chemicals are kind of located in different areas of the plant room. We've kind of put our chlorines as far away from the bisulfates as possible, the acids as possible. We keep our bicarb and calcium in an area that we can utilize them quickly, but we also ensure that they're bundled correctly as well. So this compatibility chart I originally got from Alex, so you can probably get that from him. Yeah, so it's a good way to, if you're not too sure about where you're meant to be storing your chemicals, it's good just to be able to see exactly where they need to be and how far away from each other they need to be too. Chemical spills, I won't really go too much in this, but it's making sure that you have the correct chemical spill kit. When you go to, say, Seaton online, There are multiple different spill kits that they have. Making sure you have the correct one, get a chemical spill kit, and make sure your chemical spill kits are stocked up. Because we found that even at minor spills, you still utilize your spill kits. Just make sure that you fill those up and keep the absorbent pads in there ready to go. And any questions? Yes.
In the picture you had chemicals in bags and not buckets, and you mentioned having them really tight. So if you're using, say, only a kilo and put in like a toddler's pool or something, what are you doing with that open bag?
So say this is our bike hub that we have in the facility. In those, so if we have a 25 kilo bag and we only use a kilo and we have the 24 left, we put it in essentially like a bucket or like a tub, as you can see. Yeah, we keep that there until we need to use it again, basically. And we keep that stored with the chemicals that they're located.
Okay. You mentioned that you actually have personal protective equipment, which is personal.
Yes.
Which is great and probably the all to do.
Yes.
How do you find managing your budget for that with labor turnover that we have in this industry?
Yeah, so not too bad, honestly. We honestly foresaw that every time we do a recruitment for summer, that we kind of see that we're going to hire a certain amount of DMs come summer. So we implement that within our budget. Post COVID as well, it's probably best to have personalised PPE anyway, and it was in the GSPO to COVID GSPO that personalised PPE was recommended. So that's where we originally got it from. We opened our facility literally end of October last year. So we foresaw that as a mitigation in terms of things like that. But at the end of the day, if you're protecting your staff, budget shouldn't really matter at the end of the day. So yes, all good and well that you need to hit the budget, but if you're going to council and saying, hey, I want to protect my staff, we need to make sure that they're wearing the correct PPE, it needs to fit them, then yeah.
Right. Thank you very much, Jamie, for your insight particularly in chemical management. Again, today we're looking at pools, processes, and people, and so this is very much a practical view of what Moonee Valley are doing in protecting their people at their facilities. So thank you very much, Jamie. And next, I want to welcome Peter Driver from the Bellarine Sports and Aquatic Centre in Geelong. Peter Driver will be talking to us about dead water mapping and the practicalities around that. So thank you, Peter. Over to you.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming along, and thanks to LSV for this invite. And this has come around from a platinum pool point of view, where you have all these masses of documents and your evidence for everything that you've ever had out there. Lisa was one of our auditors that came down, and I happened to have a myriad of binders. One of those displayed our dead water mapping. There was another binder that I also had, which probably has led to my invitation today. It's how get yourself involved with dead water mapping, but the understandability from someone young, their expectation of what that means. My name is Peter Driver. I'm the Aquatics Operations Coordinator at the Bellarine Aquatic and Sports Centre in Ocean Grove. City Grove, Geelong presently consists of 6 pools. So the city has a whole heap of pools, one at Ocean Grove, which is the Bellarine Aquatic and Sports Centre, Splashdown, which is at Newcombe. We have Cardinia, which is an outdoor pool. We have Leisure Link out at Norlane, and we have also got Waterworld, at Norlane. So it covers all our pools, 4 in and 2 out. We actually induct our guards at each pool. That is inducted by either a senior guard, duty manager, or a coordinator. If you look at 6 pools, through seasonal pools, through pools open all the time, that is a lot of guards from all diversities, young to old to retirees that come back and want to work a few days a week. So you've got a full facet of people's approach for what is regarded in a pool. So the area specific is about lifeguarding from my point of view. There's also a centre Pacific, which then teaches people the hierarchy of the existence of staff that you go to. Now, if you've got one guy that works over 6 pools, that's 6 people they've got to remember. They might be working 1 or 2 days a week, and it's different venues. So what we try to do is give them accountability. Way back in June 2019, we produced a series of maps for our dead water mapping. It's to try and prove what we had. So that was put together by shift supervisors and a limited number of staff who documented and archived these, which I then put together in a package. Deployment maps were also produced from these dead water mapping, glare, refraction. When we say dead water, I don't like the expression dead water. I don't like saying the D word on pool deck ever. We don't mention accidents we have, people bringing their health packages with them. We can't help that, but we try and mitigate as much as we can as we go along. So, what was the problem and hazard of gaps identified? It came back. The dreaded COVID changed our world entirely. I've actually lost track of when we shut, when we opened. The next day we opened, by the weekend we'd shut again. People were deployed, people were moved off. Unfortunately, there were decisions made, which meant that our initial staff work group coming back was very limited. So we had to deliver something to these guys with in-house training, 4 blocks a year, which is the requirement. We had to think outside of the box. How do we put in block 1 training? And somebody said, well, let's introduce dead water mapping today. So we had a look at that. That there is the 64-page document that I created. That is the dead water mapping. There were 8 of these in an opens, say 6 till 9, then there was 9 till 12, and then there was 12 till 3, there was 3 till 6. That's a lot of pages. So I'll go, here, go map, go find out. And you go, well, I don't know. That's from the shift supervisor, I'm 6'2", something a bit shorter, you know, it was all basically from here. But we had to produce something. We had to give evidential material that we had put this together. There's even part in there for putting notes. So what was the solution and how did we propose this? The rethink to the normal delivery of block 1 training is that I then rewrote another one, which is all about us, which includes glare, refraction, disturbed water, and blind spots. Within that, I put a series of photos. Again, this is what we're dealing with. It's a beautiful centre in Ocean Grove. It's got glass everywhere. So you've got refraction and glare everywhere. And that constantly moves because the sun does too. In the package, we also give a series of requirements of the instructions of how to dead water map, plus some scenarios that they had to answer some questions on. That was their full 90 minutes of the in-house training. From that, this is the results we were getting. We had highlighters, we had notes written in. This was the very first part of the package that we ever did. So hence we could change a few things up. But that's from one person's point of view by standing in 8 different locations. I've only shown 6 because they wanted to get very large so you guys can see it. Around the pool. Go stand there, tell me what you can see. Stand over there, tell me what you can see. The word stand doesn't happen on deck. Deployment happens on deck. But this gives the understanding to the staff member, the consideration and the expectation. So, how do we work this on further from there? From April 2022, all inductions at Veteran Aquatic and Sports Centre now have open and closed shadow shifts, but they also incorporate an extra 60 minutes. We hand them 8 sheets of paper. They write down how tall they are, what they can see. It's quite frightening, from this person's point of view, of how much they cannot see whilst on deck. This is put together in a graphic sense. sense of view. But the thing is, you can still make this up yourself. You can draw your centres. You can go to your maps, ask your manager to have a look. Hey, come over, look at the map, please, and I want to sketch out the pool. You can devise it yourself. You know, it's not about, I'm not selling this. I'm giving you the idea. The highlighter showed the complete blind spot. So, for instance, this person here cannot see anything behind the splash park. They've got a blind spot that leads into the main pool. They couldn't even see through that first part because it's right there. How does involving glare mapping and the induction process improve lifeguarding onboarding? Well, glare mapping provides the opportunity for the new trainee to gain responsibility and ownership of the centre that they work in. This was just not for new recruits. This was part two. Part one was in-house training for our established guards. They also did the glare, refraction, blind spot mapping. Good thing about that, on the outcome, the realisation of the individual and how much they could not see from any one given point. We talk about one point, standing there, no. Move off and find another point. But it's just an example for them to bring it on board. I know we're talking about, everybody's like on the phones these days, it's a short memory. There was we've been to conferences where they talk about the attention span. But this gave every person time. They had 60 minutes. Money well spent. Because it gave them an opportunity. And in fact, there's an example today. We drove in, right, of course, coming up from Rainy Ocean Grove it is. You come through, you go along your GPS. But they've changed that road a lot. The pure example there was, it was telling me, you're going to do this. The road was telling me something different. And that was a pure example of how things change. Just because this thing was the instruction, was telling me something to do, doesn't mean it was going to make sense to me. I just went between the trucks and I was guided. Observations were also gained from the height of the individual. Glare and disturbance very much depend on the height of the individual. The blind spots exist and will always be there. For me, I can see 2 more tiles than a person, say, of lesser height than me. But for me, that's 8 tiles I cannot see. Because I have to go to the other end of the pool to look along that boundary with a ramp going in, and that 8 tiles is big enough for a body to lie still in. We're not there to put the fear of God into these people. It's telling them the seriousness, the actual, what it's all about. You get paid good money, but you also got to have an understanding, expectation. Yes, you learn more as you go on. I get that. One of my recommendations for the industry, I say, for all those already on board of this process, you are to be congratulated because you have empowered others. That's the important bit. For others wishing to include this in an extra process to the inductions, I thoroughly recommend it. Talk to your managers, grab a copy of the building plans and trace out the pools involved at the centres. Not everybody knows, you do it with shapes in Word. If you know Illustrator, Adobe products, there's a myriad of things. You could draw it on and then photocopy. It doesn't matter how it's done. But you'll grab the evidence back. I have files from all different people of what they can see. This is actually gold. For in return, the new kid on the block, because the seasonal guys come through, uni break, first job maybe some of them have ever had. They will talk to the senior crew and they discover they have recently completed the mapping. So it gives consistency and continuity to the language shared. See, it gives them ownership. They already feel that they've been, hey, okay, I've got this. When all said and done, the environment and working conditions not change, but deployment must. Dynamic risk, every viewpoint. My 2 mantras for BASC that are in Aquatic Sports Centre. Pool lifeguarding relies heavily on the aptitude and diligence of staff. Being a coordinator myself, I'm only as strong as pool deck. And for the guards, go find trouble. Because if it finds you, it can be twice as bad. Go seek it. Find it, mitigate it. So thanks, guys. Thanks for listening. And I'm more than happy to take some questions.
Do you have some kind of measurable impact on performance, say like materials visits, since that started?
Purely the fact that they've come back and told me how much they can't see.
Yep.
That is the thing, and that's what I want to hear. That is, just because I'm telling you there's a blind spot over there, you find it, you tell me about it. And next month you'll notice the guy will be walking back, and then you can see them looking. The measurable part is how the team then comes together more and work as a team. You might have a singular guide out there, but they still know what is out there. 2 to 3 guides maximum for us. Doesn't sound a lot, but a busy day, learn to swim on Saturday mornings, kids running everywhere. Blind spots are created by kids, so they make sure they stand somewhere, look, and then move on again. So measurability, from my sense, is nothing written down, but I can see the inheritance that they've created for themselves. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. And again, a really good example of not only finding a data set that we can push into risk assessing, but also a really practical way to consult around identified hazard, namely obstruction, and how obstruction practically affects lifeguarding, and a really good way to consult with the team and socialise that risk and that hazard. So well done, Peter, and I really hope that we start to see more of this. We do a lot of dead water mapping in supervision plans, and it doesn't go far beyond that. Here's a really practical example that you can take back to your facilities to socialise that risk and mitigate it in future. Before morning tea, I'm going to invite one last guest to talk to us, Billy Sanjo from Health and Leisure Centre. Please give him a hand. He's going to talk to us about how he's managing lifeguards at his facility.
Perfect. Good morning, everyone, and thanks LSV and the team for having us here today. You always put on a good show, so I really appreciate your time and efforts in setting us up for the industry. I know I get a lot out of it, so thank you for your efforts once again. So this morning I've been asked to come here and speak about a couple of things. The first thing is duty manager and lifeguard performance. So just a little bit how we can keep on track of them in an informal but yet a formal day-to-day basis. And then also I'm going to touch quickly on the pool safety assessments, specifically the follow-up phase. I've been asked to quickly reach over that one as well. That's me. That's what I'll do. I'm the Aquatic Facility Coordinator at the Nillumbik Leisure Facilities. So I look after the Eltham Leisure Centre and the Diamond Creek Outdoor Pool, which is our seasonal facility there. Once again, I'm going to touch on these 2 topics today, but we'll just start with a little recap of last time I spoke here, and that was about our lifeguard observation records. So this is a day-to-day, every single duty manager or our duty captains actually perform one of these on each of their ships. And what they do is they assess one of the lifeguards. They just go out there and watch them for a few minutes and see how they're performing on the day-to-day grounds. They judge them on a whole basis of different areas. You know, you're cleaning, consistent movement, you're guarding the entire zone. Again, some of these are very simple and basic and some of them overlap. But the point of it is if they're attacking all of these on a consistent basis, we know we're getting the best out of our lifeguard and operations team. So we're getting the safest opportunities there. So further to that, it also gives our duty managing team a bit of a chance to upskill and actually give feedback on a day-to-day grounds and format to our lifeguard team. So a lot of the feedback we're getting from our team in particular is that they don't have the chance to actually inform and impart their own personal feedbacks. And this is the opportunity to give that to them. So they fill it out and they say, look, you've got a 45, you did a fantastic job today. I really appreciate your efforts. You're an absolute top quality guard. And there are those other days where, you know, you come in, you're tired, you're exhausted, you've had a big week, and you actually can't perform to the best of your abilities. That's okay, but in this industry, we can't have that constantly recurring. So we have to look at these data trends. So if someone's coming in and they're consistently dropping the ball, we don't attack them. We'll ask, how can we support you to get back to this standard that we want you to be at? Again, it's not about reaming our lifeguards. It's about holding ourselves accountable on a day-to-day basis to make sure that we are getting the best out of our team. The reason why we sort of had this in place in the first place was because we didn't actually have a readily available formatted document system that we could pull out and say, yep, we're providing feedback to our lifeguard team on a day-to-day basis. So that's essentially why this came about. And we worked together with our lifeguard team, our duty captain team, and the management team to essentially say, what do we want to get out of this? What's the best middle ground for everyone here? So again, what the risks were. Not having accountability for the entire team. We are people. We cannot be on 24/7. It is just not possible. We will burn out. We all love this industry. That's why we're in here. But the point is, if we're there 6 a.m. to 10 o'clock every night, we're going to be stuffed. That's not helpful for anyone. We have to entrust our teams to be able to report on our behalves. And again, overworking the responsible manager. I love working Saturdays and Sundays, just like the rest of you, but also a bit of time off is kind of nice occasionally, so keep that in mind. And, you know, sometimes we just don't hear about the daily feedback and how good our teams are going. It's just nice to see that the teams are actually doing well and we can have a documented report of that and say, yeah, good job. You know, Angus, you've actually killed it today. And your duty captain said this, this, and this about you, and I really appreciate your work. Please keep it up. It goes a long way in that casual industry. They're on the grounds, day in, day out, 4+ hour shifts. It's difficult. We get to sit in their nice, cozy offices. So give them a bit of leeway on that one. And then also, we had the inability to actually produce quickly a formal documented process, and then we moved on from there, and that's how we got the best out of it. So this is actually a couple of our teams communicating together at the Diamond Creek Outdoor Pool recently. But again, how we came about it is we used our teams. We used our lifeguards and we said, look, what do you want to be judged on? What are the areas do you think are fair? What are the areas that you think are unfair to actually be assessed on a day-to-day basis? Because you're the ones who are going to get the feedback given to you by your leading staff. And then again, at each of our quarterly meetings, we actually say, look, how are these feedbacks going? Do we need to actually edit and update? Do we think they're fair still? Do we think they're irrelevant? Do we think they actually hit the T? What are you guys feeling? And that creates a two-way conversation between you and your teams. So again, the solution, there's a no one-size-fits-all approach. This works at our facility at Eltham. This doesn't work at our Diamond Creek Outdoor Pool. We have a completely different variance to this. Still same structure, template, and format, but it's based on a whole different set of skills simply because of our physical structure that we have there. We're a different facility. And as you can see, this is our monitoring score record. So we do 3 a day ideally, 1 in the morning, 1 in the midday, and 1 in the afternoon. And it's a really good way you can see your observation and trends. Sometimes, you know, for example, Isaac's had a bad day, but then if we look further down the line, he's picked it up later in the month and we see that's an improvement. Maybe he just had a bad day, he came in tired, he was exhausted from training or life or whatever it might be. We'll give him the benefit of the doubt. But in saying that as well, if that's a recurring issue, we can't have that, not in this industry. We are here to protect and save lives and inform the public about how we can be safe around our aquatic facilities. If someone's consistently dropping the ball, we unfortunately have to have one of those difficult conversations. This also makes those difficult conversations easier. We can see on the 12th, on the 14th, you've dropped the ball. These are the comments made by your duty captain. Do you think they're fair? Do you think they're unfair? How do you feel about that? And what support do you need from us to get back into that green standard zone where we want you to be performing for our communities? So the findings was prior to this being implemented, there was no sort of day-to-day feedback actually being given around the teams. So it's created a feedback culture. And when you have that feedback culture, it's so much easier to actually have that professional balance. You know it's not coming from a place of personal neglect or anything like that. There's a reason to why it's been said, and this is the parameters behind it. Everyone feels accountable to perform for their teammates and their community. You don't want to come in and drop the ball on your job. We all know the severe consequences we can have in this industry if that's the case. This also keeps us accountable and shows that record of what will happen and how we can avoid that. Again, those difficult conversations, they can be made a lot easier with fact, and it's not just your opinion that's getting displayed. It could be a whole bunch of different duty managers across different days and different times. You could be a gun in the morning and you could be an afternoon average guard. So we need to see that coming through. And again, it's starting to spread through our other sites. It's not the exact same at Eltham and Diamond Creek and now a couple of our other sites. They're all very different in their own way. So just keep that in mind too. And it's a great way to see your trends and data in regards to how these are operating on the day-to-day functions too. So my recommendations to you all, if you don't, I would strongly suggest it takes 5 minutes out of probably what most of us do, a 5+ hour shift when we're duty managing. I think you can find the time to go out there and watch your guards and actually create that connection, and then another 5 minutes to go out and give them the feedback. Oh, I was watching you before, you did a great job with that watch around water parent, you educated them well, etc. Create that feedback culture. Again, if there's no feedback culture, those difficult conversations become much, much more common. If there is something there already, it becomes a lot easier and not personal. It becomes professional based. Explain your workload to the team and how beneficial this is so you can have a work-life balance. Again, we love what we do, but we can't be there every second of every day. I think they'll understand that. They're people too. They're there for work. They're there for a reason. So are we, but we need to respect our own boundaries in the workplace too. And lastly, it's a great way to learn more about your team. Last time I was here, I sort of challenged everyone to take 5 minutes and learn more about their guards. Once a day, go out and have a chat to them. Again, it's a great mental refresher for them. You get to learn something new about your team. Sometimes you get a little bit of feedback or a little stint that comes out of nowhere, and you get to learn more about your team through an unpresented format, so it's great. So that's wrapping up the lifeguard observations there. So just quickly moving on to the PSA assessment. So just a quick hands up if you've done a PSA before, the pool safety assessment. Cool, a lot of the team here, so that's really good. So a lot of this will be relevant to everyone, which is nice. But as you all know, the pool safety assessment, it's a big, big operation. It's not easy, it's difficult, it's time consuming, but it's very, very worthwhile. These industry standards set by LSV are helping us all be safe to our communities. So we all know when we're getting ready for the pre-assessment, a lot goes into checking our documents, checking our people, checking our processes, checking our risk assessments, making sure that everything's in order and happy to go. That way we're getting the best standards out of ourselves. The big day of the assessment, it's a big day. Depending on the size of your facility, it might be a couple of hours, which is a pretty good win. If you've got a larger facility, it could be 10, 12 hours. So make sure you give these guys a break too. Make sure you have coffee on standby for both yourself and them. Look after them. But after that, it's not over. You know, the team here will take it away. They'll get a report to you within a week or two, and then you've got 60 days to action these assessments that might help you have a safer facility for your community. Once a report is created, read through it, take your time, and just understand why these comments have been made. It's really, really crucial that you just sit there and let it debrief. Don't action anything on the first day. Just read it and take your time and let it sink in. Communicate with your teams as well, your aquatic services teams, your learn to swim team, your frontline team, your HR team, and actually bring them all in together and say, this is what the findings were from our pool safety assessment. Does this make sense to you? If not, let's take the time to explain it and work through it together. And this is where we are. This is where we need to be. You guys are the industry experts. How do we get there? Tell me. And again, taking that divide and conquer within the departments, you know. I am not a HR expert. I will tell you that right now. My background is in operations and aquatics. So my HR team was, you know, very, very helpful in my learning and in theirs to get us to where we need to be as well. And prioritize the bigger challenges too. You know, there are a lot of easy fixes. There are a lot of just typos in documents and things like that. Don't get focused on those straight away. You've got 60 days. Use the time to actually focus on the bigger tasks and get them done first. The rest comes with it. It comes along naturally. And there's a lot of things in there that, you know, sometimes I look over it and I think, geez, what's this? It doesn't make sense to me. Reach out to the team. They are fantastic. I can't remember how many times I've spoken to Lisa and I just said, hey, I've just got a question for you. She gets back to me within the day and then we go forward from there. So it's a great use of industry knowledge as well. And then plan a presentation. Similar to this one, dot point by dot point. You know, it's a little bit grey, it's a little bit boring, but it actually keeps you accountable and makes you efficient. You know, you've got section 12.08, something about the learn to swim pool. Here it is, A, B, C, up there, happy days. So, you've completed it all, you've got your presentation in order. Does it make sense? Just like this presentation here, I sort of had to go over it a couple of times and I'm like, does this make sense? Yes and no. So you go over it again and again and again, and then present it to someone in your team. Does it make sense to them? It'll make sense to you. It'll make sense to us. Makes it easier on both parties when we're going forward. Again, it's a big taxing day. It's a big taxing lead up. It doesn't have to be a big taxing follow-up phase. Ask, again, what doesn't make sense to you? You know, you're not 100% sure. That's okay. Reach out to the guys. They'll be able to support you there. And then add in those things that you can't fix as well. We're all bound by the almighty dollar in this industry, so we can't just, you know, pull money out of anywhere. So if you can't fix, you know, a financially unstable effort there, put it in and say, this is why. You know, we can't actually afford this right now. It's understanding. We get it. Finally, during the assessment, lead the conversation. Again, we've had a couple of days where it's already been a big, long day. Let's make it easier with the team. So take it ahead and say, yep, section 1, section 2, section 3, this, and this. Okay, it doesn't make sense. Can I ask why? There we go. It's all good. Again, ask the questions as to why these safety implements were actually integrated to the new PSA. So they get updated every year. Things are always getting added to make sure that we're safest for our facilities. It might not make sense on the surface, so ask why. Why was this implemented? Was there a drowning at this facility for this reason? And that's why it's added to the PSA now. They'll be able to explain that to you. You can take it back to your teams. Everybody's on the same page. And then, again, just lastly, remember, it's all in the interest of having the safest facilities for our communities, our patrons, our public. It's not about getting drilled for not having the perfect lifeguard deployment plan or risk assessments up to date. It's about how we can best be operators for our patrons. So this is just a little example of our most recent pool safety assessment for the Eltham Leisure Centre. So as you can see, section 1 we're all pretty good, happy days. And then moving into section 2, 2.01. And then that was the only one we had to do. 3.1, 3.15, 3.15A, B, C, D. Make it easy. It's so easy for this structure to have, yep, Lisa can see that, Chris can see that, Alex can see that. It's good, it's done. Again, our first aid, another section there, plant, pool, facilities. If you note slide 27, our changing facilities, we were actually unable to get a distress alarm in the 60-day period. It has been installed now, which is fantastic, but it's better to let the guys know and say, yep, we do have a plan of action for this, but right now it's not going to happen. That's just the way it is. Again, we're bound by the almighty dollar, unfortunately. Again, so my recommendations in regards to the pool safety assessment follow-up is get the assessment day report and debrief with you and your team. Just take the time, don't get started straight away, let it sit for a day, sleep on it, get your head ready, get it going the next day. Use the industry experts, reach out to LSV, ARV. I'm sure everyone in this room has a contact who has a contact who has a contact who's done countless PSAs. They might have something that works at their facility that is not 100% for yours, but you can make an alteration that will actually get you across the line. Prioritize the big tasks first. Again, you've got 60 days. It's so easy to get nitpicky with the easy fixes. You can knock them out in a day and then leave everything for 2 weeks, and then you're 2 weeks behind in maybe tackling some of the difficult challenges. And then just make your presentations. Make your presentation as you create the corrections. So get your dot points in order. And then actually, as you fill them in and correct these actions, add them into your presentation. Keeps you accountable, keeps you tracked and ready to go.
Again, this was a practical way that we can address risks and control perceived risks within our facility. It's a tool, it's a data piece that gives you context into your risk management process, and it is also a tool to confirm that your risk management process is working. So I can't thank you enough, Billy, for going over that part of the assessment that you do. We're looking at LSV, we're looking at developing that. So if you're going to give it away, I'm going to ask you, can you give it to me, and I'll whack it up. I'll put it up on our resources page within the portal. So there's a resources page where you book for this assessment. We can put it up there. We'll brand it Aligned Leisure, and we'll go from there. The one point I will make on Billy's presentation is, yes, you do have 60 days post your assessment to complete what we call a consult review, and that's your final assessment. We have had a couple of facilities in recent months that have got 100% on the first go, and haven't had to do the pool safety assessment consult review, which is the 60-day review with us. It is possible. I challenge you, see if you can get out there and get 100% on the first go. So well done, Billy. Thank you very much. Coming up in the next part of our session, I'm going to introduce Lexi Barlow, who's also from the Greater Geelong area. Lexi's actually going to talk to us about pool safety assessments and her experience recently. She came from one facility in Winactive and went to the Greater Geelong sites. And what we're looking at here is transitioning into a new site and preparing for pool safety assessments and informing yourself about risk. So please give Lexi a hand. Thank you again. Cheers.
So I'm going to start off with, I think we kind of did it before. Sorry, Bobby, I'm repeating.
Who here has changed roles or experienced a change of leadership in the last 2 years? Yeah, we like playing musical chairs in this industry, definitely. So as a result of that, who has either not done a full safety assessment or only done their first one in the previous 2 years? Yeah, I'm kind of falling into that category as well. Yep. And as a final one, who gets a little bit nervous or stressed every time I say the word full safety assessment or platinum 4? A little bit of, oh God, that's a huge amount of work. Yeah, cool. So for me, I have come from, as Alec mentioned, WinActive. It's a much smaller enterprise. You can see a few people hello. We ran 2 facilities and it was 1 coordinator doing both of it. Very different to where I am now. We have, as Pete mentioned before, 6 facilities, 2 of which are outdoor, only 1 of those is seasonal, about to pick up a 3rd outdoor, plus our 4 indoor facilities. So across the 6, nearly 7 sites, we have 5 individual leadership teams. So for me coming into that, I attended one of the smaller centres, and coming into it, we've had a lot of musical chairs and there wasn't a lot of records still existing. We had people who'd been there 17 years and who had exited and essentially taken information with them. Why do we engage LSV to do full safety assessments? So they are designed to ensure that we are operating at the platinum standard. This is not only for ourselves to get a bit of an endorsement that we are doing things correctly, but it's to provide the safest possible service delivery for all of our patrons. No one wants to end up in that coroner's court. No one wants the worst case scenario. This is one of the many steps we can take to prevent that for ourselves. So they essentially give us a how-to guide to do this, right? It's identifying opportunities for improvement. It's not just a sticker on our doors and a piece of paper that we can frame. It's something that we really need to follow and action and get through. A little bit about my journey. I started off as a lifeguard at 16 at WinActive. From there, moved up to a duty manager at 19. COVID hit, everything went out the door slightly. Came back in as the aquatic operations coordinator after my mentor and previously spoken Jamie Washburn moved on to bigger and better things. And then ended up moving on to Geelong just a year later. That was at the start of this year. So I have been a coordinator less than 2 years. It's quite a challenge, as I'm sure many of you can imagine. This title here has only recently been introduced at City of Greater Geelong. Like I mentioned, there are 5 leadership teams, and we all have very different personalities and operating styles and ways that we like to go about things. The Aquatic Operations Specialist is meant to be an agent for change in the network, driving consistency and moving forward to align with best interest and push forward from that. So the role itself, it's a lot of consulting, collaborating with my wonderful team over there in the corner. We together come up with change and discuss how to implement that at each of our very unique facilities. This role has not come with no challenges. Right? It's, like I said, 3 or 4 months old, and we were given a very blank slate to operate with there. So it's been a lot of learning. I am learning constantly, and my wonderful team give me a lot of grace for that. But there are a lot of pre-existing processes that we approach this with, and a lot of preconceived notions of what this role, what myself in this role could or should do. This all varied between our senior leadership, our centre management, ourselves as a working group, and the frontline staff of what this could very well be. So specific to the pool safety assessment, this role is to review previous approaches and methods, whether that be, as Peter mentioned, lovely big folders with every single document we could possibly need, an online format of whatever we like to do, and kind of streamlining it into one approach that could be slightly tailored to everyone but work across all the sites. It's not an easy feat, and like I mentioned, there have been hiccups. And with this only coming in the last 3 or 4 months and our assessment happening 1 month ago, 2-month preparation window wasn't ideal. But a lot of what I'm going to talk about is our plan moving forward and how setting up this role for success will assist our team in success. The Aquatic Ops Specialist coordinates the network-wide documentation. So this includes stuff like training calendars and records, qualifications, our emergency planning committee, health assessments, and ensuring the documents across our 6 facilities have a somewhat consistent framework, and that includes your supervision plans, your emergency management plans, your quality risk management plans, your risk assessments. As we all operate under the same owner, we all should have very similar documents. As I mentioned, a lot has happened in the last couple of years. A lot of that has gone out the window, so we are recovering and getting back to that and trying to make it a very unified approach. How do we prepare? Geelong, like I mentioned, has 6 pools, 5 leadership teams, and each centre has their own unique profile. We have LeisureLink, our biggest facility currently, very family fun. We've got slides, we've got a massive winter garden, great place for families. We go down to Splashdown, it's a much smaller facility, a much older population, very different demographics. We go out to Ballerine with Peter, and then again, there's a much smaller version, but they are pretty much everything. They have courts and everything attached to them. So preparation for all of them will be slightly different, but we try and create the same support and process available to all facilities. So up on the screen, we have a few of these examples. We have a previous audit sheet, our OneDrive folder, and a document folder. So these are 3 different approaches, kind of fall into the whole process for us. So the Aquatic Specialist is available to all centres to conduct a sort of mock consult. So we'll take this previous audit sheet and at the centre's request can go in and start that process. It's like a dry run, essentially. It gives us our first opportunity to do a bit of a gap analysis of where we are sitting with all of our documentation and the physical layout of the centre. Do we have all our signage up? Are all of our documents reviewed? Are our risk assessments up to date? Is it relevant? Does it cover off every A, B, C, D listed in these sheets? To store and present these documents, we have this picture in the middle. That is our OneDrive folder. You can see it's broken down into our individual centres and one that's labelled the network. This is what was pre-existing when I arrived at Geelong, and it was used to about 60-70% capacity. And it's something we're still working on. It's definitely not perfect, but we are working on having this completely uploaded so that any single one of our coordinators can walk into another centre and run the audit if, God forbid, we needed to. So, good process that we have, still working on the execution of it. And the third step is for the presentation on the day. Whether some sites choose to print it all out or not, it all comes back to that picture in the middle where we have it all uploaded. OneDrive, it holds live documents. We can just review them in there and it'll be updated for the following year. To go along with that, we've developed a network review calendar where all of the documents you need, such as your emergency management plans, your supervision plans, will be worked on as a collective over a 12-month period. So I know the 4 to 6 week lead up for me previously has been quite a stress of trying to get all those documents, pull all the training quals. Has this person attended all 4 of the sessions, or did they attend 3 and went on a holiday for another? That 4 to 6 week period for us, we're going to extend it out over the 12 months between every audit and slowly tackle it one at a time. So when we get to that audit day, it's not a huge heart attack for us. It's somewhat readily prepared. We have multiple systems for this. We have a third one that I don't have listed here, which is our internal document storage. We have so many layers to prevent us from losing this in the future. Hopefully they work. If anyone has any better ideas, we are all ears. Our network consult, as we have the 6 pools, it is quite a process to get, we had Lisa auditing us this year, get her out for 6 full days across, a couple of weeks to individually audit the centres for 8 to 10 hours a day. So as a network, we have some shared documents that we all use and that are consistent across all of our audits. Presenting them 6 different times is going to be time consuming and quite frankly repetitive and unnecessary. So we hold our initial network consult via Teams. This is what's inside of our network folder currently from the previous page that I showed you. Our microbiological testing all comes back in the one document. Our emergency planning committee is managed across all centres. It's not necessarily centre specific, although we do have representatives from each site. We present this across a roughly 2.5 hour, I promise there's many more documents, this doesn't take us 2 hours, consult to cross off a lot of section 1, 2, 4, and 5 of the audit. So when our auditor comes in on the day, we're not going to sit down in a room for 4 hours and have to go through just paperwork. There is a bit that we do, but this cuts off a lot of that for us, and it goes across the entire network. So when they come to Splashdown, which is my home center, she's not going to look at the same documents that we are looking at for LeisureLink and Ballerine over and over again. As a result, our actual audit days take anywhere between 2 to 4 hours, I'd say. And so it comes in, Lisa comes in, and it's a very smooth process for us. We've already, had our mock consult. We've taken notes from anything we've missed in our initial network consult, and all of that can be presented at once. It really reduces the follow-up that Bobby has presented for us, and just makes our process a lot less stressful and less time-consuming. So some learning outcomes for us, for me specifically, having moved between sites, a calendar for document review. Like I said, you don't want to be panicking everything in the 4 to 6 weeks beforehand where every other piece of work gets neglected because we are stressed. We're going to be implementing this moving forward as, for example, in July, you're going to look at your deployment plan. In August, you're going to look at your emergency management plan. And it'll be done across the whole network in our fortnightly meetings together. So the framework is going to be consistent. It's going to cover all of our individual things we need, like weather, staffing, when someone doesn't show up, picked up on all of those. And it'll keep it in line as a process that we can move forward with for the next 12 months, 2 years, 3 years, so that when there is movement again, as I say, we play musical chairs all the time, the next person moving into my seat or into the one at Ballerine or LeisureLink, they can pick up this process and keep going. It's not going to be a panic for them and a relearning for them every single time. We have fortnightly team or working group meetings, and we have a permanent agenda item of platinum pools, so we can check in on the progress of our preparation, our follow-up, the document reviews, and any stresses we may have at that point. And the aquatic operations specialist, a large part of this role that is currently being developed is to drive that on behalf of the network. So making sure they're all booked in, all the preparations there, support is there, being there as a second line on the day to take a little bit of that workload off the coordinators. Thank you.
Thank you, Lexi. Just a couple of points to pick up there from Lexi's presentation. The network consult that Lexi's talking about is a service that we started doing during COVID in order to help us audit facilities that were either isolating from COVID or had some type of closure or lockdown. But it was an initial online audit, so we split the audit in two. We do need to come and do a physical assessment of your facility, but we can do some of the documentation stuff online with the joys of modern technology and Teams and being in this environment now. So for a group of facilities like Geelong, where they have 6 facilities and 1 management system, it is much more efficient for us to assess all facilities across their management system and documentation first, and then come out to the facilities. So there is that option, and you can always talk to us about that. I'm going to run a bit of a session here now. This is a bit of a workshop session, but essentially what I'd like to do is throw it to you, our audience, to say what risks are you having in your facility, what hazards, what issues are you having in your facility from a risk management perspective at the moment? What questions do you have around risk or around a particular issue in your facility? Jamie, a lot of talents left the industry.
Train staff to back to that.
Training as an issue. How many of the rest of us are having this issue? Yeah, everyone's having this issue? Right, okay. I gave you a risk assessment at the start of the program, and we're going to run with your issue, Jamie. Here we go. The risk that we've got here is that talent's left the industry. Is that how you want to define it, or do we need to define it in a better way? The risk is we've lost information, we've lost procedures, we've lost talent from the industry. How would we contextualize this in a risk management way? There's a lot of new staff, so that's context. So that goes on the front of our risk in describe what risk is being assessed. How else is it contextualized? It's post-COVID, maybe. Anybody else? Okay. Who does this risk affect? Patrons? Who? Management? How does it affect management? Higher stress levels, perhaps having to actually come and work in frontline and other things might be getting missed. How did it affect patrons?
You have inexperienced lifeguards that they haven't done as much training because they've only done one lifeguard course.
Yeah. So you've got experienced lifeguards that have left, and you've got no basis or understanding or experience left in the facility to train the new staff coming on. So a lot of what's been discussed around the industry at the moment is calling that the green or greenhorn type staffing model at the moment. So learnings have gone out the window and we haven't retained them. Right? Okay, these are all contexts still on the front page. So the risk is that, or the risk that we're looking to assess here is that we've lost knowledge. Right? Who would we consult with about this issue? How could we inform ourselves more about this issue? You could, yeah, Lauren pointed directly at me and said you. Yes, true. What else could we do?
Well, it depends obviously where you're coming from. So for us, being all radio, obviously we can talk to the HR, obviously we've got to push it up the line as well. Contract partners as well.
Yeah.
Be transparent as well about the circumstances we'll be dealing with. And then probably somewhere along the line will just come to you guys as well.
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. You could speak to your management teams internally. You could go up the line. You need to speak to your contract partners to make sure that there's an understanding of what's happening there. You can come to us. You can inform yourselves with, say, the State of Sector report from last year, which had some COVID analysis in there. We've got another one coming out in a couple of weeks, which will look at the last 12 months. So you could inform yourself there. I saw another hand over the back. Yeah, so consulting directly with the lifeguard staff themselves and asking what training they need. It's exactly. There's another hand over here a minute ago. If we were to flip over the page and to start to look at the hazards associated with staff leaving the industry, what are these? And we've mentioned some of these in context so they can come straight in. So they can be things like we have an untrained workforce. Go ahead. So staff are currently without the ability to identify risk or hazard, or they don't have the experience on how to do it. Yep. What, if I just take that to the next step, what can happen as a result of that? Injury, death to who? To patrons, public, etc., to themselves. I don't think there's anybody else. Patrons, public, management, maybe not, mate. We'll say, yeah. Say again. Injury to the lifeguard themselves because they're doing something that they shouldn't be doing. So you have a delayed response time that leads to poor emergency management, leads to poor outcomes potentially to the victim in an emergency situation. It also could lead to confusion. It might lead to a breakdown of systems or command or anything like that. All right. What's another hazard as a result of staff leaving our industry? Staff shortage generally, yeah, okay. And what can happen as a result of it? So duty managers coming out of duty manager roles, ending up in lifeguard roles, swim coordinators ending up in the pool, and other things happening. What else is the effect of those? Fatigue. So we've had so much movement in the industry lately that people have been promoted, and I'm not having a crack at anybody, but like there's people that are learning their feet still and need extra support, and so there's a whole lot of support issues as well. What can happen as a result of that? Again, emergency situations don't get dealt with. There's a potential outcome or to a patient or a victim or somebody in our service that either doesn't get the service that they ought to get and has a poor service or gets injured in one of our facilities. Right, what controls are we putting in place around each of these hazards? What are we doing? So you've formalized your in-service training. Yeah, I'm not paying you to say that, but essentially what you've done is you've employed subject matter expertise to help train or close the skills gap. So specific site inductions, absolutely, and re-looking at the site inductions that were done previously, maybe re-inducting everybody so that everybody's back up to scratch and aware of new procedures is another controlling factor that we can do to mitigate risk as a result of staff turnover. Any others? Yeah, so optimizing shadow shifts. So by that you mean making sure that there is an experienced person on the shadow shift with the new staff member, if possible. I know of facilities that they've got a team member in and they're shadow shifting with somebody that started 3 weeks ago, and that's really tough. I definitely understand that's tough and that's probably happening. But what it means if that is happening, we need to put further controls in place to ensure that both staff members are inducted properly and that we can continue to upskill them. So extra training sessions to catch up. So we actually need to, as managers, as tough as it is right now, in the thick of this, think about that onboarding process, make sure that it is robust and actually go above and beyond what we perhaps used to do to make sure that our staff are well informed of procedure, etc. Right, so that, see how we're starting to build this in a risk management context? Consequence and likelihood at the moment, we're in a situation where our lifeguards, our duty managers, our middle managers, our senior managers are all new. Consequence and likelihood just got a little bit higher. So our bar is sort of raised towards the idea that we're going to see some incidents. We've also, to take you right back to context, we know that the public were affected by COVID. The demographic of or the people that are coming into our facilities didn't swim for 2 years. Some of them swam in open waterways and aren't used to being in a pool environment. Additionally, we've got a cohort of 7-year-olds that learned to swim at 7 instead of 5 or 4 where they might have previously. So we've actually got this weaker group of youngsters coming through. We've got people that have lost conditioning and lost fitness through COVID. And there's potential for more incidents in our older adult populations. And add on top of that we're back to normal. And so for the last 3 years, it's as though it didn't happen. And people are coming into our facilities and expecting what they saw 2 years ago and expecting it to be the same and that our skill level is as high as it was back then. So all of our stuff has gone out the window. In terms of proposed controls, I think a lot of the controls that you're already putting in place there are quite reasonable. Yeah, inform, PD, professional development. We're trying to put some professional development, or we are putting professional development out on our portal, the same portal that you booked into today. There's videos on there. There's how-tos on there. There's how to lifeguard on there. We're trying to push our resources for Watch Around Water, which I'll come into in a second. We're trying to upskill as best we can. And these type of workshop sessions are going to continue to be free into the next 12 months. We're going to do another 4 of them next year, 1 a quarter. From this department, there's other departments here at LSV that are doing them as well, from Swim and Survive through to our people team that do master classes and the like. They're free for your team to come to. We're happy to tailor it towards lifeguard and duty manager level. We're happy to tailor it to swim teacher level because I don't think we can do enough to support that. All right. I'm now going to talk about our Watch Around Water summer launch. How many facilities in the room are running Watch Around Water? Everybody, just about. It is relevant for public pools that have lifeguards. Victoria, I think we ticked over 238 facilities, thereabouts, which is the most number of facilities of any in the country. And of the pools that can qualify for this, we're talking 238 out of 290 facilities. So it is pretty much the norm in Victoria at the moment. If you're going to a public swimming pool, watch around water or something like it should be in place. We're today launching our watch around water message for this summer, which is watch me, not your phone. So our key message for summer, and those of you that came to the supervision workshop that we did just a couple of months ago, will remember and recall that we did some work on how much attention span people have and how quickly their attention span is diverted when they've got a phone in front of them. And anecdotally, that's about 7 seconds. So you can do something for 7 seconds, and then we're now getting trained. TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, they're all doing this story stuff. It's about 7 seconds that people have to get you a message in a short snippet of a video before our brain goes, no, I want to look at something else. And so we're getting consistently trained or honed in on this idea that we only have this short amount of attention span. So the risk for us, watch me, not your phone. So our set of digital mock-ups clarify that picture. So we're making these available. They're available, quite a number of them are available in this type of format where we're flicking from a picture out of focus with the phone to a picture without phones on pool deck. And I don't know whether that's going to be easy to implement at your facilities or not, but that's the challenge we're setting. And that's the key message that we want to put out for this summer. There are a lot of other summer safety messages coming. We've got Water Safety Month coming up, which is a national campaign, used to be called Water Safety Week. The Water Safety Month coming up, there's a whole myriad of different messages coming across all sorts of platforms. Watch around water is watch me, not your phone, but there's the Swim and Survive guys are doing activations. We've got the Swim Between the Flags messages going out on beaches, and a whole raft of other things. So how does this look for you in your facility? We've also recycled these from a couple of years ago. So 2018, this campaign went out, which was again a watch me, not your phone campaign, but we also had keep me safe, please watch me. And the idea back then, we were having an issue with a lot of people looking to log on to centre Wi-Fi. And the campaign push for that particular campaign in that year was to change your Wi-Fi handle away from your facility public to something like, please watch me, please keep me safe, etc. So this pack is available as well. When we last met the Platinum Pool Steering Committee, which was June, the Platinum Pool Steering Committee said to us, yes, we love this. We love the packs that you put together, and we love the messaging from Watch Around Water, but it feels tired. And what they also said to us is we want this in digital asset form. So rather than just produce the posters this year round, we've provided all of the elements that went into the posters, including the Photoshop originals, such that you can just throw your own background in there. You can develop your own assets local to your facility. You can hashtag it the way you want, but watch me, not your phone, watch around water are the two that we want you to put on there. We've given you our logos, the watch around water logos in a number of colors. We've done the watch me, not your phone. You can recolorize that. There are a couple of phones in the digital pack that that white bit in the center is just because this has got a white background on it. So digital assets are available, and these can be posted as you see fit. Where to? Because everybody that's got a Watch Around Water subscription has a password protected space where you can go and get all of the original resources that we've got, all of the training packs for how to train your staff. We're in the process of updating the current training pack. The current training pack has drowning data from a couple of years ago in it. We're waiting next week, the Victorian Drowning Report And from that, we will update the Watch Around Water training material with that current stuff. So that's coming, and that's going to be up to date. You've got Audible resources already on there. We met with the Platinum Pool Steering Committee in June. Again, I said, and this just, we want Audible resources that we can put on PA systems. These were actually done about 5 years ago. They're still in there. We are looking at another set, but the ones that are in there are still in there, and you still can use these. There's videos and etc. But the newest bit is the bit that I've got highlighted here right at the bottom, which is the Watch Around Water Summer Launch Pack. From there, you can download the poster pack, which you can print. They're in PDF format, so anybody can access these, and they should be accessible. And we've got all of the posters from the 2018 campaign and all of the current ones that I showed you a minute ago. The digital assets is the digital asset pack. It's about 93 megabytes, so it might chew your internet for 5 minutes while it's downloading. But they're in Photoshop format, and you can give these directly to your media teams to play with, do with what you like. If you're going to do that, please hashtag them. Please at us if you're going to put it on LinkedIn or on your Facebook and that type of thing. We want to share this message as we go forward, and just be careful with those assets. I know your digital marketing people are all over this. Right. The other thing that we've done, and I've just highlighted this, is we've given access. Now we've done a bit of work. Last couple of years, we've had people worry about their ordering of resources. I'm talking about physical resources, their wristbands and whatnot. We've done a bit of work in the last 3 months building an online shop. And the online shop is accessible via your login. However, because we had to integrate that with our retail, there is another password to get there. So you can land here. You will note on this point where it says access to Watch Around Water Resources Shop, there is a password for this season that'll get you into the back end of our store. It's just to stop people that aren't currently members of the Watch Around Water program taking the IP essentially. So that's why I had to do that. But there's a password from this link. You just have to put that password in once. That'll take you through to Watch Around Water store. You can order wristbands, pull-up banners, what else? The lifeguard cards, posters, A-frames, etc. And there's no more process of, or there doesn't have to be, and you can still order it with the order form like we used to do, handwrite it, send us a PO and that type of stuff. Our Watch Around Water inbox will still take that, but you can order directly. You can, and it's paid by credit card up front, and this is the quickest way that we will get resources out to you this summer. So that's happened. For those of you that are swim safe facilities as well, we've got that coming. That's still a couple of weeks away, but the same thing will happen within the swim safe space via the swim safe portal, via the store, etc. And our swim safe summer launch is somewhere in January if you're a swim safe facility. So YMCA facilities mostly are attached to our swim safe, and then we've got a lot of councils on board. We're always looking for more on that swim safe program as well. So back up here in our resources for customers section, we've already got a whole lot of translated resources. We do have other translated resources coming, but we weren't able to get it in time for this summer. So we will do that into next year as we continue to improve. We're also looking at, Chris is heading it up, but we're looking at languages for the Audible section as well in other languages. With that in mind, we can't do every language. What we're taking advice on the languages that people speak when they don't also speak English. So we can produce stuff in every language for every community. However, if that community group also is likely to speak English, that's not as high on our priority list as people from communities that only speak a certain language or are newly arrived. So we're preferencing those at the moment, but we can go down that path. The 4 workshops that we've run this year covered supervision, risk management that we did today, emergency management, and we did a recruitment and retention one for staffing. We're looking for what the next 4 are. So if you do have topics that you want to see, that you want us to cover, We're going to be asking the Platinum Pool Steering Committee this afternoon the same question. Please feedback. Our email address is ais@lsv.com.au. So that's AIS@lsv.com.au. Thank you very much. Thank you for your attendance.